because I trust my own empiricism and rationalism. But
right, predictive models is where it breaks down at, and that's where I go with it. Is like, if you could take the information that you get, like if you start from your sense perception and you derive conclusions from what you're observing, and then you can independently confirm those conclusions as to be what is most probabilistically true about reality, and then you can use that information in order to make predictive, to generate a predictive model about what will happen in the future. Now, that doesn't assume basically that this is the appeal to like regulatory theory as opposed to necessitarianism. And I hold to regulatory theory because necessitarianism at its core begs the question, and that's kind of where Van Til was coming from, is that he was a necessitarian. That's where he's arguing from, even though in his works he never explicitly stated that he was arguing from necessitarianism. You kind of get that from where he's arguing from, that the laws of nature are prescriptive, and that in order to justify like the teleological argument. But ultimately you see where that's begging the question.
Yeah.
So I hold the regulatory theory that these things are descriptive, and that, the human frame of reference is not intended to be the way the universe is looked at. And so I can say, because the entailment of my position is that truth claims or claims about reality are going to be probabilistic in nature. So because of that, I can simply, because we can't get past, the hard problem of solipsism, that they're going to be probabilistic in nature, and therefore, if the probability is backed, or like the probability is such a high degree by virtue of predictive modeling, that it would be irrational to doubt them, to doubt these things as true, unless you had evidence to warrant that doubt. So that's the only like counter you could really have, is like, I don't believe that these things are prescriptive, that these things are descriptive, and so that's pretty much it. Hypotheticals work in a way, but they're just hypotheticals. With no like, until we get a concrete answer, we can't really set on any one particular thing.
And what was your short answer to like, do you believe in infinite regress for causation, or causality, I should say? Your short answer.
I would say an infinite. I would say that there's not an infinite regress of causality, because the universe has always existed and it simply changes states. That's all it is.
Oh yeah, how do you define time? Is like the measure of change.
On this side of observability, time is the measurement of the distance between change.
The measurement of the distance between change. Like, why can't we define it and why can't we define it simpler? Like just past, present, and future. It's like past a time would be like a point of past, present, and future defined by, I don't know. Like, what does change have to do with it? Like, can't you define motion or speed or to be the measurement of change?
I'm sorry, say that one more time.
Can't speed or acceleration or motion be the measure of change, like a change in position? Like, why does it have to be time?
Well, the time is just how we describe that. So like when we measure the distance between 2 points of change, that's what we're talking about.
Like, so how am I using time to measure the point of which my pen is over here to when it's over here?
Right. Okay, so the language we use to describe time is completely arbitrary. It's like, what we call like a second, an hour, a day. That's all relational. It's relational to it's just relational to our, like, I think pretty much to our relationship to the sun is how we measure these things. And so, but the labels we give to them are completely arbitrary. So the way you look at it is that time is like, if you have a point and then there's a change, then the distance between those two, and then there's a change leading to another point, then the distance between those 2 points, the distance between that is quantified as time. That's literally just the distance between them is how we're describing that. So if you think about it like points on a line, so I've got one point where the state is X, and then I measure again, and then the state is Y. Well, the distance between X and Y, I can articulate as time. and that's how we express time in this state when it's intertwined with space, because remember, things move linearly, and so you've got one point and then another point, and then any observed change in there, the distance between that is like it took this long to get from point A to point B.
What's your religious background, JL? Because you sound like you.
I was.
Like,
Go ahead.
If I were to guess, I would say that you used to be Christian related, and then grew up, got into philosophy, or took some classes on this and that, and then decided to switch and not be that.
So I was born into, raised, and confirmed in the Methodist faith.
Yep.
And it was a short time after my confirmation that I began to recognize some issues. Some things started standing out to me that didn't make sense. And when I went to explore those things, I realized that the individuals that I thought might have those answers did not actually have them, and that pretty much set me on my journey to try and figure this stuff out. And I think it was about a little over a decade later, I pretty much was an atheist, and it would be like another 2 years after that I would actually be like public as an atheist, like I am an atheist, and be able to actually like tell people that, because I was living in Texas at the time, and telling people in Texas you're an atheist is not good.
Yeah, just like straight Baptist Texas.
Exactly.
You're kind of the way that you describe that, like kind of like, I'm also kind of like publicly speaking, I'm like a closeted atheist, because for the last 2 years I've been a Christian, and the only person who knows that I kind of gave up Christianity 3 months ago is my wife, and she's the only person that really knows, because I'm on here all the time, so I can't really hide it from her anyway. And it is kind of for the same reason that you're describing. People didn't really have answers that are very instrumental to Christianity, and I kind of just denounced it for those reasons. Like what's the method? Like, how do you believe in how do you guys have such faith in believing in supernatural things that I just don't believe that these things can occur? Like when it comes to Moses, Red Sea, walking on water, Jesus' resurrection, all types of shit. And
yeah.
When people are saying like what's it called? Like the stereotypical atheist question, like you don't have any evidence for God. The way that I redefine that question is by saying there's no methodology to show supernatural truth claims. And that's the equivalent of me saying there's no evidence for God, there's no methodology for demonstrating supernatural truth claims are true. Do you agree, disagree at this point, or like?
I agree with that, absolutely. That the biggest issue that I've seen is that the number one issue I've seen is that there's no mechanism by which these individuals can eliminate their confirmation bias. And so, having run into that problem is that there's no, I would say there's no, like, how am I trying to articulate this? You are correct on that. There's no methodology. Labeling things as supernatural is just kind of stopgap, because it's just basically, conceding that we don't know the explanation, but they're going to say that when they say it's supernatural, they're essentially just kind of saying that this thing can't be explained by naturalistic means, so therefore it must be supernatural, which is just, silly.
Why? Oh, well, like, are you saying that? I thought you were saying like the definition of supernatural was silly. Or are you saying that like if a thing happened that you can't explain through your own rationality or empiricism, like if you can't explain something, then you would label it as supernatural? Or are you denying like the definition of supernatural in general?
Okay, so I'm just what the term of supernatural is like referencing in that respect. So like you've got when people label things as being supernatural in nature. Okay, so yeah, I ask, what do they actually like say? What are they saying? What are they saying about that? If they observe a phenomena Okay, and by their perception of the phenomena, it cannot be explained by naturalistic means, or they don't know it. Okay, are they there? They can make two claims. They can say, "I don't know how this happened," or the only way this could have, or the only way I could say that this could happen is by supernatural like intervention, like divine intervention, or some supernatural means. Okay, some violation of the laws of logic or the laws of reality or some shit. Okay, so I'm kind of like, well, hang on a sec. So what are we saying when we say a thing is supernatural? Essentially, all we're really saying is that we don't understand it currently. So,
I'd say I kind of deny that definition. I'd just say that if we experience something that either I think the correct definition, maybe that's some way that some people describe it whenever they're talking about having some type of spiritual experience. But the way that I describe it is if that something undoubtedly exists outside of or breaks the laws of nature, then that would be supernatural. Like, it's just in the name supernatural.
see, and that's problematic. And see, that's problematic. And that's problematic because when things break the laws of nature, there are both direct and indirect effects that would be measurable, like in reality. Like if you broke the second law of thermodynamics, okay, that would if that law was broken or was capable of broken, the effects of that, like the indirect effects of that, would be devastating for this universe. Okay, simply because of the way our universe operates, this universe would look different. It would not look the way it looks, and certainly wouldn't measure the way it measures. Or they if these things could be violated, they have effects beyond the initial just like event itself. There would be, because just like dominoes, you can't just flip the one and then that's the only thing that happens. There's going to be like trickle down effects. Especially when you violate the laws of physics.
Yeah, that's a pretty extreme example. And like, yeah, I know. Like, if we were to take even one atom, just delete it out of the universe, then the entire universe would crumple into under its own like gravity or whatever. But I'm thinking of more religious examples of like Jesus walking on water. Like, that breaks the laws of physics. That breaks the laws of gravity and buoyancy, as because we don't float over the top of the water like a cork. But like, those types of things would be a more simple example of like breaking the laws of nature, which is usually the examples that are used.
Yeah, and and we can actually say that, well, technically, by the laws of physics, you actually could walk on water. Technically, it wouldn't be walking as we perceive it, because in order to do that, all you need is speed.
Yeah, like it can be.
So technically, you could walk on water. Yeah, you just need to be fast enough in order to do it. So you need to be moving fast enough so that your pressure on the water, because of how laws of motion work, so that when you step on the water pushes back on you with equal force enough to keep you on top of it. Okay, like the Flash. So that's how that would work. So technically, you could do it, but then they're not describing Christ operating like the Flash. So obviously, there's some sort of like thing going on here. When you brought up spiritual, like when people claim that they're having or they have had a spiritual experience, that's actually a big beef with me, because I ask, what are they saying? What are they essentially saying when they say they're having a spiritual experience? And by my estimation, like how I look at it is like, all they're really saying is that they're having a profoundly emotional moment, is pretty much all they're saying. Because if they're saying that they're having an experience that necessitates having a soul in order to count as this, well then by what mechanism are they differentiating between a feeling that a feeling that necessitates a soul in order to be felt, or just extremely profound emotions that are overriding their rationality? Like, how are we differentiating between the two? Is there a mechanism? And there isn't. So
I actually believe this is from a non-religious perspective. I believe in the existence of a soul, and perhaps because of
really
it was based.
Oh yeah. I think it's will come down to a game of semantics with you, but because I see, how do you explain everything that is immaterial, that is you, like your consciousness?
Consciousness is an emergent property of the brain. There is a measurable, demonstrable, and there's measurable and demonstrable correlative and causative relationship between the two, between the brain and mental phenomena, and there are predictive models that we have established that allow us that basically tell us that when we tweak a particular area of the brain, or when we do something to it or manipulate it, then we will know what exactly will happen. So like if you're if an area of your brain is necessary for having a particular mental phenomena, I can go into your brain and I can mess with it, and I can either trigger a mental phenomena or I can eliminate your ability to have that mental phenomena. So the correlative and causative relationships are established enough through mapping of the brain and how the brain wires itself and how things code. We understand these to the degree that consciousness, much like consciousness is just an emergent property of the brain itself, much like, and one of the best examples of this was an experiment done with ants trying to move an object through trying to move it was a big T that had to be moved through a small opening, and it could be done, but obviously one ant can't do it, but all the ants working together were able to do it, and they were able to do it faster than humans could, which is interesting because they replicated with people. And so, well, how did the ants know? Do they know that it was no, but the intelligent action is, in order to accomplish the task, they had to do it a specific way, which means that intelligence, or be making observations, all mental phenomena, just requires a brain. And the complexity of that brain results in a higher capacity of mental phenomena. To a higher degree. That's pretty much all it is. I don't think it's anything more complex than that. And I think that the hard problem of consciousness is a result of asking inappropriate questions.
Like what? Like what?
So, when we say, what is consciousness? Okay? Now, the hard problem of consciousness exists because there are ideas about what consciousness is that I think philosophers ask that I don't think they need to be asking. Deeper concepts. But I don't think that the evidence warrants going to that degree. Is just all it is. I think that if we simply look at it, we have brains. Our brains operate in a very, very well-known way. Consciousness itself is the umbrella term that covers the entire scope of mental phenomena, which is everything from your awareness, your reasoning, your evaluative processes, your emotions, your intuitions, all of that shit, all your knowledge, all of that is encompassed by your consciousness. Okay. And then we measure the degree of that, the depth of that, with sentience and sapience. And so the measuring stick on that is how humans do it. And then we measure other organisms' ability to do that by comparing them to our own, which is why we call it sentience and sapience. So, essentially, if we're not multiplying our entities unnecessarily, then there's no reason to go beyond the idea that intelligence, especially to our degree, is nothing more than a virtue of our brains. Because we can see, predictively, that if I do something to your brain, I'm going to fundamentally alter your ability to do those mental phenomena. In a predictive way. So, I just don't think the hard problem of consciousness is really a thing. I think it's an example of philosophers asking questions that don't need to be asked.
It's a terrible appeal.
I think the only question that is necessary in order to see if the existence of your consciousness. I think that JL, aren't you a hard physicalist?
Yeah. If you would put a gun to my head, yeah, I pretty much. I do my best not to presuppose, but then again, I don't beg the question of the existence of things that I don't, of the existence of things that I don't have access to. So I accept that the only way we can really explain phenomena right now is via naturalistic means, and in order to claim those things are true. And so, for example, if you want to say that certain things are possible, or then you have to presuppose that something outside of the laws of nature, or something that operates or exists outside of the laws of nature beyond the scope exists. Until we can demonstrate that thing exists, there's no point in even speculating. And I also don't engage in metaphysical speculation, because metaphysical speculation is bullshit.
Well, and the next question I was going to ask you is going to be pointless, Sam. So,
The way I comport my worldview is that I come to a metaphysical position based upon the evidence. I don't assume a metaphysical position in order to justify my own intuitions about things. So this is pretty much how I operate. Try to be as intellectually honest as possible without multiplying my entities unnecessarily. And so, for example, I'm a moral relativist. Okay. Well, my moral relativism is a metaphysical position, regarding morality, but it is predicated upon the evidence, and it doesn't assume anything that, assume the existence of anything that I don't have access to in order to justify moral distinctions.
Like what, God?
That's pretty much all it is.
Like what? God? Like the access?
Okay, so if you want to appeal to moral realism, or like, you know, that there is an objective moral standard, or that there's an objectively true standard for moral distinctions, well, then you have to say, okay, well, what is the source of those things? Like, what are you appealing to that indicates that these are what moral distinctions must necessarily be in every single case? You know, what are they? So, what are you appealing to? Are you appealing to God? Okay, great. You're appealing to God. Please demonstrate that the God exists in order to justify you appealing to it. And, you know, that it exists independent of mind and context to be a thing that actually, you know, ascribes these things, or that dictates these things. Or if you want to appeal to some unknown law of physics or whatever, it's like, well, until you can demonstrate that these things are there, that they actually exist externally, independent of mind and context, why are we appealing to them? The evidence all indicates that morality, the capacity to make moral distinctions, is entirely mind dependent. And it is predicated upon our evolved capacity for empathy, which is not the same for every person, and your formative years, what you get from your parents and your peers and your personal experiences as your brain is developing and it's coding memory and, you know, experience, blah, blah, blah. And so eventually you wind up making moral distinctions between what you have subjectively determined to be right and wrong, or good and evil, which is why these things don't, and this is exactly what we would expect to see, is that there's very little overlap. Though there's overlap, but there are obviously mitigating circumstances. Mitigating circumstances exist because we're not all identical, and because these things are mind dependent. This is exactly what we would expect to see. Extenuating circumstances, mitigating circumstances. One person from a frame of reference views an act as being, you know, inherently bad, while the another person from another frame of reference, or maybe with more information, says, no, it's a gray area, or no, this is good. This is an inherently good act. Even so, that's exactly what we'd expect to see if morality is relative, is subjective, mind dependent.
Maybe I just, when you said moral realist, I thought that meant a moral objectivist. Be like you believe in objective moral facts.
Right? Yeah, and I don't. I don't hold it. You know.
I thought more
epistemic norms down the toilet.
Yeah, I thought that moral realism was essentially moral objectivism. It was because, like, the idea is, like, there are objective.
Yeah, basically,
same thing.
But, moral realism, moral relativism, subjectivism, objectivism. So, but the difference being mind independent and mind dependent. If it's subjective, it's mind dependent. If it's objective, it's mind independent.
Yeah.
So if you want to identify a source the mind independent source for what moral distinctions necessarily are in all cases, feel free to identify that thing, and then we can appeal to it once you have identified what it is, where it is, and where it came from. Okay? So in that respect, it's like, great. But if we look at it from, what does the evidence tells us? Human beings exist. Human beings have an evolved capacity of empathy, being social creatures. There are, you know, explanatory and predictive models that back all this up. And so when we make moral distinctions between what we've subjectively, you know, determined to be right and wrong, or good and evil, or good and bad, or whatever, when we make these distinctions, these are predicated on a bunch of, like, subjective stuff, which is why we don't always come to the same conclusions. But societies are composed of multiple people coming together and finding those overlaps, the things that they agree on, and establishing a goal. What is the intention of the society? Is it just to survive? Is it to make everybody happy? Is it to make everybody healthy? You know, whatever. In that respect, then we formulate moral frameworks that everybody must abide by if they want to stay in the society.
Want to know what the moral objectivist was say? Is moral anti-realist? Does that just mean? Well, the thing is, you keep on saying moral realist, like you're a moral realism, but I understand that to mean. Do you mean just moral relativist? Is that what you're meaning to say? Because moral realist.
Well, I'm a relativist.
Relative. Okay, that's probably better.
Yeah.
At least that's how I understand it. Moral relativist is moral subjective. Okay. The response from a moral objectivist would be, just because everyone has a bit of a different understanding of what is good, bad, right, and wrong, that doesn't mean that. That still means that everyone has a higher standard that they're applying to other people on the way that they ought to behave. And for the record, I am a moral subjectivist, but I know the response. I would say, well, how would you respond? But it's like, if an entire society of people is saying that there is a higher moral standard that you should appeal to, then what is that? Like, where are they pulling that higher moral standard from?
Right. Yeah. What are they appealing to?
Yeah.
And the problem with the God thing is that if they agree that the God is a mind, and that being a mind is non-quiescent, minds have thoughts, blah blah blah. If they agree that the God is a mind, then they cannot say that God supplies the objective standard, because how can a mind be the source of mind independence? So, like, what exactly is it that the God is, like, referencing to indicate these things, or simply just arbitrarily describing them as these particular things? That's the problem with if there is a God and it's the one that's dictating what is good and what is bad, or what is immoral and immoral, then those distinctions are completely subjective and arbitrary, because the God exists, nothing exists external of itself to act as a referent, especially for coherency. So therefore, anything it dictates is good or bad or moral or immoral or whatever is simply what it wants. It's completely arbitrary and totally mind-dependent on it.
I think that the correct way to look at it wouldn't be to say that everyone's pulling their objective moral facts out of God's mind. It is more like God, with his mind, created an objective moral law that everyone appeals to. So they're appealing to the moral law that God placed, not exactly his mind, because that's just not the doctrine that any religion follows.
I would simply say, it was like, what is this objective moral law that everyone... so the question is, there could be a God that is laying down a law that, a law for the system it created. It could be doing that. Now, because it's, like, laying it down itself, and it's, like, determining what that is, but if there's nothing external of itself to reference, then that thing is completely and totally subjective to it. It's simply saying, this is the way I want it, because this is the way I want it. Not because this is the way it must necessarily be. There's no constraint on the God to make anything a particular way. So therefore, anything it says because it wants to, not because it must. So therefore, if it lays down a particular moral framework for the world that it created, it's a subjective moral framework, fine, but is it necessarily true in all cases? Well, if you agree with the God, sure, but maybe it won't be. Okay, then it just comes out, because it is subjective. It's subjective to the God. Well, it's subjective to me as well. Because I can disagree with that. Like, for example, God thinks that genocide is good when it uses it to do things that essentially shouldn't need to do that. But if God does a genocide, it's okay. I say no, it's not. It's never okay. So
I kind of want to ask one more. Well, I guess I'll only ask one more thing, because maybe Apophatic and Nyarlath want to kind of like defend their position because they're both Christians. But usually when people say, like, okay, so that means that you don't think that it is objectively true that genocide is bad. So that, like, technically the claim genocide isn't bad. Sorry, fuck me. I can't articulate this correctly. Technically, the position that you subscribe to is that genocide, or like raping and murdering and torturing children, isn't an objective truth that is good, bad, right, or wrong. It just is the way that it is. Like, it's not good, bad, right, or wrong. It's just a matter of your opinion.
Yeah, it comes down to the outcome of that. I myself, by virtue of my evolved capacity for empathy, I don't agree with that as an action. But like, that's just me. It is subjective. It's mind dependent. Yeah. By my empathy, my experiences, my knowledge and understanding of the world and of people and stuff like that, I don't see a purpose for it. I don't, I could say that there's actually there's actual evidence as to why it would be negative, but even that is subjective because it comes down to valuations. Because a genocide wipes out a large portion of a population. If you talk about the population of humans, if there was a massive genocide, you're wiping out a large portion of the population. A large portion of the population dead takes a lot of our genetic diversity with it, and if you decrease the genetic diversity of the species, eventually you're going to run into problems later on in the future because of inbreeding, because you've reduced the genetic diversity. That could technically be said as a bad thing, like an objectively bad thing, but that's only, you can say that's objectively bad, but that's only if you value human reproduction and survival. Because some people don't.
This isn't the question that I'm asking, though. I'm saying, like, in the topic, in a debate scenario, like, would you just basically bite the bullet and say, like, so technically...
Yeah, it's subjective, yeah.
Yeah, and also...
just because the vast majority of us happen to agree on that, not all of us do. But just because the vast majority of us happen to agree on that as humans, we are the same species. We reason kind of the same. Our empathy is within a range. And because we are normal, average people who are able to walk around and compare individuals, because we can do that, we will have some overlap in our subjective distinctions, in how we evaluate these things. And obviously, a lot of us will say, yeah, so genocide is bad. It's subjectively bad. We agree on that, but it doesn't make it like an objectively true state of the universe. Like the universe is telling us, mind independently, genocide is bad.
Jesus was a Muslim.
Okay. The thing that's probably a funny, like, gross last question is, how do you justify that homosexual incest is a bad thing? Because
that homosexual incest is a bad thing?
Yeah, because there's no inbreeding, because, homosexuality, and then, like, but incest is, like, clearly, like, that's a gross thing. But how do you justify it?
I consider it amoral. There's that's going to come down to the individual. Some people will say, like, oh, that's so icky. Some people are like, I don't give a fuck. And in this one, what two people can say, as long as there's consent, what two people choose to do, that's on them. I honestly don't care.
But you probably could justify as to why, like, regular non-homosexual incest is a bad thing.
If it's within the bounds of the law, of the established law, and it's consensual, like I said, if it's consensual, then between two consenting adults, there you go.
Yeah, I asked that question because I got asked that question yesterday, and I've heard it before, but I didn't have a proper response prepared. And like, is that another bite the bullet question where you're just like, I don't know. Well, I guess it's not.
Yeah, I'll bite the bullet. I just consider it amoral. There's nothing inherently moral or immoral about it. Nothing inherently moral or immoral. People can subjectively say, ew, that's icky, therefore it's immoral. But I don't. Two consenting adults doing what they want to do in the privacy of their own homes. Like, what is that doing to you? How is that harming society? How is that depriving society from attaining its goals? It doesn't.
I mean, two adults. Let's say there's this